What's up, everybody? Hope everyone is well. And for those of you who sprang ahead this week, I hope spring is springing or has sprung, depending on where you're at. Some tour dates. So April 4th, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Cannot wait to see you, Pittsburgh. Excited to see you. April 18th, that's a virtual show. It is free. You just have to RSVP, and you can get all information at my website. May 16th, Los Angeles, California. June 5th, New York City, baby. I'm bringing Anti-Fascist Pasta Night to New York City. And then, of course, these are all preview shows because the Anti-Fascist Pasta Night is going to Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in August. Tickets and all information at romplacone.com. And, of course, Left It Wall is out now. Do you need to take an hour to laugh a little bit and enjoy an anti-capitalist comedy that calls out the Wall Street machine, but is packaged in a lovely story about family? Check out Left It Wall. You can see myself, Gareth Reynolds, Dave Anthony, Graham Elwood, Eddie Pepitone, Sally Mullins, Kimberly Hill, Sarah K. Godot, Andrew Saxena. Awesome cast, wonderful people. Anastasia Washington. The list goes on and on. Sage Francis has a cameo. romplacone.com to find out where to watch Left It Wall. I recommend, though, watching it on Tubi. It's free there. All right, enjoy today's episode. Episode 130, Gavin Charles. Last week we had Zac Polston. Well, this is the other half of the Vanguard. Gavin Charles is a YouTuber, journalist, and filmmaker. He's the creator of the found footage indie horror series No Clip. And, as mentioned, he's the co-host of the YouTube Breadtube show, The Vanguard. Please welcome to the show, Gavin Charles. Gavin Charles, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How's it going, Ron? So glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. This is Silly of Silly and Billy, and so we're gonna get Silly's side of the story. This is gonna be exciting. I think that you know, when the history books are written, y'all are gonna have the coolest bromance in Breadtube.
Yeah, it's super funny that you had Zac on, I guess, last week, and now me. So you're gonna get to hear my side of the story. Hopefully, I can one up Zac's performance on this podcast. To all you people that heard the last episode, get ready for the real story in this.
So I always like to start at the beginning. So give me the Gavin origin story. Where are you from?
I'm from the Kansas City area. Technically, I was born in Wheaton, Illinois, but around age 2 or 3, I moved back with my family to the Kansas City area where they're from, and I've basically grown up in the area. Along with Zac, who I met in 5th grade. We started talking about politics actually at the lunchroom table during the 2007, 2008 presidential election. So, pretty crazy era at that point, the end of the Bush era, the beginning of the Obama era. And I've basically been into politics ever since then. So I guess, just as far as a pretty basic origin story, that was it. Growing up in the Bible Belt, right in the middle of the country, becoming a progressive, getting super into leftism around the time that Bernie Sanders ran for president. And yeah, during the pandemic is when Zac and I decided to make the podcast, create a YouTube channel. It's something we'd talked about before, but I never really thought it was possible. I was like, what? Everyone has a podcast. Everyone wants to do a podcast. Like, come on, like, is anyone really going to listen to us? But Zac kept pressing on it, and he kept saying, we should really do this. We really have a good kind of chemistry and an ability to talk about things like politics and film. Might as well at least try. During the pandemic, we really got that opportunity because I was promptly fired from the first job I ever actually got that wasn't just like working as a busser in a restaurant or some shit like that. I just got this job editing wedding videos for a company called Toast Wedding Films in Kansas City. And that was, again, my first job right out of college. I graduated in 2020 during the pandemic and waltzed right into that job, shitty job, only paying me $15 an hour to do work that I hated and thought was tedious. My boss was an asshole. But still, I was like, oh shit, I got a job. I can potentially work my way up from here, do better things, hone my skills as an editor. But then again, literally about a week after getting hired, I was fired because the pandemic hit and no one was having weddings anymore, at least not in the traditional sense with videographers. So that industry, I gotta see the disruption going on thanks to the pandemic, which again led to me being fired. But that was actually a huge there was a real silver lining to that, which is that I got unemployment. I was able to apply for unemployment, and socialism really came through and really created the possibility for the Vanguard to exist, because I went from making $15 an hour to getting, I think it was like something crazy, like $600 a week from unemployment, which at the time just felt crazy. I was like, this is amazing. This is the best thing ever. And since we had nothing else to do, I started reinvesting some of that money in podcasting equipment. I upgraded my laptop, and Zach and I went to work on the Vanguard. And that's kind of the origin story.
I think there were a lot of people who in the pandemic realized that, when people just have a little bit of breathing room, isn't it amazing what is possible? And I think the powers that be didn't like that. I don't think they liked that people started realizing, why do we live the way we do? Like, I'm not suggesting that people wanted to be locked down forever. Of course not. But they kind of realized, like, it's ridiculous that we're working nonstop just to get by. If we had a little bit of breathing room, a better work-life balance, living wages, the possibilities are kind of endless. And the powers that be were like, oh God, we gotta switch the gears on this as soon as possible. So 5 days, you're fine. We swear. And just open a window. It's all going to be fine. Don't worry about anything.
Yeah, I kind of think there should be like a pandemic, like the Olympics, like every 4 years or something, without the actual illness. I don't want anyone to get sick and die, but at least a lockdown. I guess that's what I mean. There should be a lockdown every 4 years or so, where people are kind of forced to, stay. It's not necessarily even stay inside, but divorce themselves from this work schedule, have the time to explore their actual passions. And again, that money, the weekly unemployment, in addition to the COVID stimulus, that really solidified my belief in universal basic income, because so many people want to do projects. They want to make art or do a podcast or whatever it is, but that stuff's pretty expensive. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you probably don't have an extra $600-700, $1,000 to invest in the equipment necessary to actually do this stuff. I mean, even a microphone costs a couple $100 if you want to take it seriously. A webcam, again, a MacBook that you can edit on. That stuff's expensive, and I didn't have any of it. It was all thanks to that stimulus money. Again, what felt like a universal basic income at the time. It made it all possible. Literally, I wouldn't be able to do this if it weren't for that money that I received during that time, or at least I wouldn't have been able to do it as well. I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the pandemic. And honestly, despite, again, how horrible it probably was for the people that actually had to go work and on the front lines, I think that for the people that didn't, it kind of did provide a little bit of a respite from the grind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we're going to get back to you in just a second, man, because we got a lot of fact checking between Silly and Billy here. So we got to compare and contrast. But a real quick aside just on that, have you been paying attention at all to what they've been doing in Ireland?
What specifically?
So in Ireland, like you brought up UBI, in Ireland, they've been doing this program where they've been giving artists, and I'm not sure exactly what the qualifications are. I'd imagine there's some kind of application process, but just sort of like a broad umbrella artist. They've been giving artists €1,000 a month to just sort of supplement their income, to just sort of like, be able to put more time and effort into their art, and just sort of like a supplemental thing. So far, they've been finding out that for every euro they put into it, they've been getting €39 back into the economy. So it's actually been working really well, giving creatives like just kind of like a UBI to just be more creative. And, like I'm saying, I'm like, well, of course you're giving money to the most financially irresponsible people in the world. We're artists. like we're artists. That's what makes us. It's like you give money to an artist, they're going to freaking spend it. Like you give money to a billionaire, they're going to think it's something evil to do. So it's like, of course it's working, but that's great that this is. So yeah, that's
incredible. I didn't know about that.
I've been following it a little bit. I mean, I'm going to do deeper dives at some point, but I have been paying attention to it a little bit because it's been very intriguing. But getting back to you. So 5th grade does check out. That was Billy. Zach also said 5th grade. So the way he recalled it, you guys were the only people packing your lunches, generally. So you sort of just found each other at the lunch table. And then you started talking about politics right away. Now, your parents are a little lefty, yeah?
Yeah. I would call them. I would say they're definitely Democrats, progressives, whatever you want to call it. They were definitely very excited about Obama in 2008. And obviously that was pretty infectious. I got real into the hope and the change. And I was like, let's fucking go. This is crazy. This is awesome. And again, I think at least a part of that, I've always had a bit of a contrarian streak in me. I'm not going to lie. And again, growing up just surrounded by Christians, Republicans, fucking, all these evangelicals. I think, again, not that I didn't believe in the policies, but a part of it at the time, being as ignorant as I was about the world and about political issues, part of it was just like, hell yeah, this is going to piss off all my neighbors. This is going to piss off all the teachers in my school. Again, all these white Christian Republicans. And it's like, again, at the time, Zach or I barely even really knew what we were talking about when we debated politics. It was more just kind of like going off of vibes and stuff like that. But I remember when I was in first grade, it was actually the year of Bush's reelection. And I was just becoming politically cognizant. I was just becoming aware. And I think this might be my first ever political memory of being a lib or a progressive or whatever, because my teacher, I don't even know why she asked. We were in, I think, first or second grade. My teacher literally asked the class, she was like, who here supports Bush? Because again, it was the election year. Every single kid in the classroom raised their hand. And then she said, who here supports Kerry? And I was the only kid that raised my hand. Wow. I genuinely think this is one of my first 5 memories. It was like a mix of embarrassment because everyone else was pointing and laughing. They're like, what the fuck? This one kid is supporting John Kerry. But I was also kind of felt like a badass, because I was like, I'm the only free thinker in this fucking class. In reality, I was the only one that had progressive parents who weren't just filling my head with Fox News bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But, I started to kind of get into that, where it was like, yeah, I'll be the one that's, stands up and says, fuck George Bush. And then by the time 5th grade rolled around, I was obviously a little bit more aware, and Obama was a lot more exciting than John Kerry. So I really went all in on that. And again, that's where Zach and I kind of started debating because his parents were more Republicans. And I don't even remember what the substance of the debate was, to be honest.
You guys were kids, but yeah,
exactly. But it was definitely the origin of our political discourse, that's for sure. And it's hilarious now to even imagine Zach defending a Republican or John McCain or whatever. But again, we were mostly just repeating what our parents were telling us.
Well, when did he kind of flip? Because obviously that's not Zach now.
I think pretty quickly after that. Because Zach and I went to different middle schools despite meeting each other in 5th grade. We actually went to different middle schools and different high schools.
He didn't say that part.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. We easily could have just lost track of each other and never seen each other again and just been a distant memory for one another. But yeah, thanks to Facebook Messenger and really Facebook in general, we kind of reconnected and realized that we both still were into politics and that we also both were still into movies. And that was the other big thing that really got our friendship back on track, was that we both were just hardcore into film, going to the movies together, stuff like that. But yeah, I think it was around Zach's middle school era that he started to have his awakening and come to terms with the fact that he was more on the left. And again, I think a lot of that was growing up in the Bible Belt, having LGBT friends, stuff like that. You grow and learn.
Oh, of course, man. And so were you guys did you keep in touch throughout the middle school, high school years, or was it you cross paths again later? And if it was later, when was it?
So the 5th grade elementary school stuff was in 2008, and then we probably reconnected around 2012. So after about 3 or 4 years, middle school. But yeah, we reconnected again thanks to Facebook. And I know it was 2012, 13, because I remember the first time we actually kind of got together and hung out again after our hiatus was to see the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. Mm-hmm. in the theaters, which came out in 2013. And Zach worked at AMC at the time, but neither of us were technically old enough to see The Wolf of Wall Street, so we had to get a ticket to a different movie and then sneak in. So that's how I know it was 2013. But I think we'd been chatting on Facebook Messenger even a little bit before that, so maybe around 2012.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's you guys kind of, that's sort of like a typical thing. And then, well, what was college for each of you?
I went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is in town in Kansas City. And I studied film and media, got a bachelor's in film and media. Zac went to school in Chicago briefly for film, but he pretty quickly realized he wasn't super into the program up there. So he, after I think either a semester or a year, he moved back to Kansas City. And then he also enrolled at UMKC where I went. So we kind of reconvened there as well. And that was right before the podcast started. You know, I was finishing my degree at UMKC. Zac was back in town. Bernie Sanders 2.0 was happening. Again, this was like in 2019 or so. So, you know, we were real fired up about Bernie. And then after getting real fired up, we were real pissed off after Bernie, you know, unfortunately did not get the nomination, Joe Biden. And that really was the birth of our podcast. Again, that frustration, that anger. It's why we were so angsty and angry back in the first couple of years of our show. Because again, we were coming off of this massive defeat. Everything felt hopeless. We had to somehow try to get excited about Joe Biden, which was impossible. And that's why we actually interviewed Green Party candidate Howie Hawkins and his running mate, Angela Walker, as our first ever guests on the show. Right after Bernie had lost, we launched the podcast. Pretty inopportune time for a progressive show to, you know, come about. But I guess not, because it's worked out.
So sticking with the Bernie movement, I'm always curious about this perspective. Especially from, you know, like Gen Z members and stuff like that. Why do you think we being, you know, blanket lefties, why do you think we've lost so many people since the Bernie movement?
What do you mean by that? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, like a lot of people, and I have my own takes on this, but I just want to get yours. Like a lot of people were really inspired by Bernie. He was selling out stadiums. There was really this air of, you know, oh man, things can be different. Things can be better. You know, from my perspective, you know, being a little older in 2016, it was like for the first time in my adult life, I really felt less alone than I ever did politically in the United States. You know, like for a long time, it was just sort of this acceptance that, well, I'm a leftist in the United States and I'm in a very, very, very conservative country. So it's going to be a very slow grind. And then Bernie comes along and you see all these people and it's like, oh, more people feel this way. And then everything just slowly shattered, and we've lost people to Trump. We've lost people to, you know, some like weird, you know, terminally online libertarian sect. We've lost, and so, you know, I've been trying to figure out the proper autopsy of like, well, how exactly did that happen? And I think there's a lot of factors, but yeah, I'm curious your take on it.
I mean, I think ultimately what it comes down to is sort of I think trauma, at least something I've noticed, is that trauma really changes people. And sometimes not always for the negative. You know, a lot of people experience trauma and they come out stronger. But I do feel like, in a sense, watching what happened to Bernie, not only once, but twice, inflicted a little bit of trauma on the movement and on people like you who, again, felt that it was possible, felt like they weren't alone, as you mentioned, you know, felt like, oh, shit, this is actually going to happen. There's actually a real chance here. And then to see not just Bernie lose democratically, but specifically in 2016, watching the machine rig it against him. I mean, that was radicalizing, man. That was radicalizing. And it's honestly a miracle that I didn't fully get nihilistically black-pilled and become a right-wing grifter or whatever the hell, you know, because that was the first election cycle I ever got to participate in. You know, even though I was excited about Obama and I talked about, you know, our debates back, I couldn't fucking vote. Bernie 2016 was right as I turned 18. Like the first caucus I ever participated in was the Kansas caucus, in which Bernie Sanders won. That was the most exciting. I still think to this day that might be the most exciting day of my entire life, because I was like, Bernie won in Kansas, you know, like what the fuck? Like, this is crazy. Like, he beat Hillary Clinton. And even though people talk shit on caucuses, it was so exciting being in a caucus room with actual people who were realizing in real time that, oh shit, there's more people on the Bernie side of the room than the Hillary side of the room. And at that point I was like, it's off to the fucking races. Here we go. Like, he's unstoppable. And then he won in Michigan. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, I remember it well.
I mean, it was insane. And then to watch it just, again, be rigged, to watch the machine come in and say, nope, not quite. I know you're all super excited about this. I know you think it's possible. And again, I mean, who knows? Bernie might have lost even without the rigging, but still, it felt at the time like they were just ripping the heart right out of our fucking chest. And I think that did traumatize people. And I think it led to people thinking like, well, it's just not possible. And I was the fool forever believing that it was. And I think that, sends people in a variety of directions, not to defend the decisions various people made in the wake of that. Obviously, there was grifting. We both experienced that. We both experienced people taking advantage of the situation and preying on people's nihilism, right? So I'm not trying to justify that at all. Again, it's why Zach and I try to stay 100% principled regardless of any of the stuff. But, it was just so foolish for the Democratic Party to take that enthusiasm, to take this political revolution that was happening and to say, nah, we don't want any of that. We don't want any of that energy. And then I feel like, unfortunately, that energy did get kind of transferred over to the right, where they did get their revolutionary candidate and their fake populist, with Donald Trump, who Bernie could have beat. So, I obviously I do blame people for grifting. I blame people for turning to the right, but I don't blame people for just tuning out and saying, fuck this shit. I got super invested. I spent all this time. I knocked doors. I donated money only for the machine to come in and fucking take this from us at the last minute. And then for it to happen again in 2020, although admittedly not as criminal, not as corrupt with the rigging, but still, I mean, it was very traumatizing. And I feel like that ultimately is what explains it. And it's why I blame the DNC more than just about anything.
Yeah. When you mentioned Kansas, this is actually just a side note, because I'm curious. Have you guys ever had Thomas Frank on the show?
Actually, one of our very first interviews ever was with Thomas Frank, at least one of the very first big ones. Like we're like, oh shit, like this is a real guest. Thomas Frank, super honored to have him on.
Oh, he's cool as hell. But have you read The People Know, his book about the history of populism?
Yes, okay. I think it was actually right after he published that book that he came on our show to talk about it.
Okay, so I freaking love that book, and it's for anyone not in the know. First of all, go out and read that book. But second of all, like it's about what populism actually is, because I mean, if ever there's been a term that's been completely co-opted and bastardized in recent times, I think it's populism. But his book breaks down what populism truly is, and it talks a lot about Kansas. And it's like when you read that book, it's all of a sudden, at least my takeaway was, it's not surprising why somebody like Bernie does appeal in a place like Kansas. And I think there's I think it's like Matt Leck said this when he was on the show. It's like we really need to start taking back our radical history, because I think that'll start answering a lot of the questions that we have.
Oh yeah, totally. And speaking of Matt Leck, his co-host on Left Reckoning, David Griscom, I think just published a book about populism in Texas, the history of populism in Texas. I haven't read it yet, but I saw something about that on Instagram. So that's very much in line with that tradition as well. Obviously, a lot of states like Kansas or even Missouri, where I live now, they do have more radical histories than people give them credit. There's a lot of that history here, and in retrospect, it does make sense why Kansas went for Bernie. Because of the populist history.
Yeah. Oh, no, I love to see it happening. And like, I can even speak to something on a personal level. Like, I'm an Italian American, and Italian Americans in the United States, a lot of times that's associated with, more right wing reactionary politics. And there's a history behind that involves everything from, propaganda around Christopher Columbus to Mussolini to, like reactionary takes on the civil rights movement to, look, people like Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone. But there's always been this lefty response to that so many people, like, it's like there have been anti-Columbus Day protests led by Italian Americans since the frickin' 30s. There's like one of the first socialist mayors of New York was it like there's always been this backlash, like a strong union presence, because like one of the biggest contingents of union history in the United States came from the limestone workers from Italy. So it's like there's always been this other side to it that the people just don't know about. And now, like for the first time in my lifetime, there are organizations like dedicated to that. And I freaking love to see. I mean, it's part of the reason why I call my new Fringe show Anti-Fascist Pasta Night, because like I just like, it's so awesome that people are taking this back. And I think that needs to happen, you know, across the country in every niche imaginable, because I think that's kind of like the way to move forward. Like, but what do you think about kind of this new generation stepping up where capitalism is a dirty word? How do we kind of harness that energy into something constructive?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I mean, it definitely feels like progress. I remember when I was growing up, as you mentioned, kind of before Bernie, like I still, you know, even though I was super young at the time, I remember watching the Democratic debates with my dad, and like no one really took Dennis Kucinich that seriously. Like he was the only like kind of left wing option, and he wasn't really like, you know, it was always kind of fringe candidates like Mike Gravel ran, but like no one really took him seriously. Like there wasn't really anyone that felt like a serious left-wing option. I guess people in retrospect say that Howard Dean was kind of progressive, but still, you know, it wasn't this like socialist energy that Bernie brought to the table. And you're right, he really did kind of popularize the term. I see way more people in the wake of his movement, you know, talking about or identifying capitalism as an issue or like the reason why things suck, you know, late stage capitalism, all this stuff. And I think it's just undeniable. You know, I think that's the other thing. I think we are in a point where it's like, you know, we're in like a fucking recession, the inflation, like it creates issues in anyone's life who's not ultra wealthy. And most people aren't ultra wealthy. Most people do have to deal with the hardships that capitalism brings their way and the, you know, annoying aspects of life. And yeah, I think that as far as harnessing it, I think the DSA has done pretty good work, but it's tough, you know, because ultimately this is a capitalist system. Like America is a capitalist country. Our economy is a capitalist economy. It's kind of hard to run as like a post-capitalist politician in a world that is very much not post-capital. You know what I'm saying? Like it's at this point, it's baked into the cake. So you literally do have to either be a straight up revolutionary, which doesn't always work well with the machine of politics. You know, you go in there, you're like, I'm ready to start the revolution. Well, it's like, you got to take 50 votes and meet with your constituents and do all this boring shit. It's not really the fun work or exciting work of, you know, what you expect. The other approach is to kind of be like, well, I'm going to go in there and work within the system and, you know, try my best to make changes on the margins where I can. And I think that, you know, some people have had varying degrees of success doing that. But unfortunately, I do think that what needs to happen is another Bernie style candidacy where, like, I know people say you can't just expect one person running for president to solve everything. But I do think that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that Bernie was proof of that, right? Even though he didn't win. Imagine if he had, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, think about how much progress was made even with him losing. As you said, people think about socialism totally differently. People think about capitalism totally differently. And we just need another nationwide movement like that can really galvanize people around a central progressive message, a message of socialism, much like Zoran has done in New York City. I think we just need that on a nationwide level.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think Mamdani is an amazing example, especially because you saw, you know, in New York City, you saw a lot of you saw a little bit of everything going on there. You saw electoral people really getting excited. And then you saw like people that weren't really like electoral politics people, that were a little more like outsiders. But they realized like this guy is a step in a better direction. This guy, you know, is definitely a good opportunity for this city. And we're seeing, I mean, he's been, as of the recording of this, he has been fairly successful in implementing what he wants to do. The promises he made were, you know, pretty attainable and pretty like mayoral focused. You know, It's not like he went on there like just talking about whatever as if he just wanted clicks or something. Like he was hyper focused on what he wanted to do in New York. And it translated and it's working and you love to see it. And people are going to be, well, it's already happening, but I think it's going to continue. People are going to be pointing the fingers going like, why can't we have this in every city?
Yeah.
Why can't you just pay people living wages to handle the snow? Why isn't that just a thing? It's totally possible. Why can't we, you know, allocate more of our city budget that way. Like it's just, and it will kind of change. It will kind of like change the anatomy of things, I think. Like I think you're totally right. But you mentioned, kind of like a revolutionary approach, and then the sort of like, I got to be inside the machine. Do you think that it takes both?
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, I think most of the more revolutionary activity obviously usually occurs from the outside,
right?
Because that's just, again, like what do you even really do as an elected official? It's really hard to just go in there and actually like just blow things up and completely reform the entire system. It takes a while to do that, but I think that the people on the outside are really important as far as organizing goes and providing that more revolutionary energy. And I think you're right about Zoran and Bernie in the sense that they both were able to kind of unite various factions of the left, in the sense that, Zoran did have a lot of really radical revolutionary support, but he was also able to secure the support of a guy like Brad Lander, who's kind of just like a more normie Democrat up in New York. And I think to actually win elections, that is pretty necessary. But yeah, obviously I'm a huge fan of the revolutionary mindset. I mean, one of my biggest political influences and something else that really got me into politics growing up was just reading about the 1960s and the sort of hippie movement and the Black Panthers and the very revolutionary energy that existed at that time. And I said, as soon as Trump got reelected, that we need to bring that back in a sense. Like we do need to not only pursue a political revolution, but an actual cultural revolution as well. I think that is one thing that people don't talk enough about these days. They're so hyper-focused, understandably, on like getting people elected, that there is less. One thing I love about the 60s is like, yes, it was political, but it was also just like people kind of taking things into their own hands in a sense. Like, fuck it, we're going to go out and I'll get naked in a field for a week and fucking party and listen to music and like celebrate peace and love and do a bunch of acid and smoke weed and shit. Like there was this like, mindset where it's like, yeah, fuck the politicians, fuck the Vietnam War. Like we have to do this ourselves. We have to bring back this culture of peace and love. And, there's something nice about that you just don't see as much these days, partially because everyone's always online. Everyone's always indoors. People don't socialize as much anymore. People don't go listen to live music as much anymore, let alone believe in it as like a world changing force or power. I think there's a lot of room for that. And, in lieu of politics, in lieu of waiting for politicians to come and save the day, sometimes that is all you can do. So
getting it back to you a little bit, like when did you know you really wanted to study film?
I mean, I think that I got really like obsessed with film when I was probably around middle school. And it actually started with like this weird autistic obsession with the Indiana Jones films, which I still love. They're probably my favorite movies ever, the original 3, which is weird for people to hear sometimes because I generally like really kind of experimental, avant-garde, surreal stuff. But that's where it all started. I got obsessed with the indie movies. I would watch them over and over and over again, literally like 50, 60 each.
What's your favorite?
I mean, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is objectively the best.
Okay.
Temple of Doom is my personal favorite.
Same.
It has this weird, like, gross out factor. Like, they're eating the fucking bugs and snakes, and the dude gets
the braids.
Out.
Yes.
That was like, at the time when I was a kid and I saw that, even though it's a PG rated movie, it felt like the first, like, R rated horror film I had seen at the time. I was like, this is so fucking gnarly. This is crazy. And I've just always loved how weird and dark that movie is. So probably Temple, but I do think Raiders is objectively the best one. But yeah, I just got so obsessed with those movies, and I watched them over and over and over and over again. And then eventually I'd seen them so many times that I had nothing else to watch but the behind the scenes features and the bonus, material, and like all the back in the day when physical media would actually include great featurettes and special features and stuff like that. And at that point I started to, get it kind of transferred from just being into Indiana Jones to then I was like, well, now I want to see all of the movies that Steven Spielberg has made. So I started, going through his filmography, and I watched basically every single film he'd ever made. And then it just sort of spiraled from there. And I got really into world cinema, and I got really into art house cinema. And I remember watching like Pan's Labyrinth and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon for the first time in the 2000s. And I was like, holy shit, like foreign film. This is amazing. Like I've never seen a movie like this. So then I got really into Asian cinema and I started watching a bunch of Wong Kar-wai. And then I started, checking out books from the libraries of the greatest films ever, and I would go down the rabbit hole and watch all these Ingmar Bergman movies and Fellini films and all this stuff, and I got very nerdy about it. I got to the point where I was just like obsessed with it. I was one of the very first ever Letterboxd users. I don't know if you ever used Letterboxd, the website, but I was using that shit like when it was still in beta mode, like back in 2012, like when no one knew about it. I was just obsessively logging movies, watching movies, and then there was a little film festival at the community college that my parents work at that was that they were like, you should make a movie to submit to this. And I was like, what? Like, that's crazy. But I was really into David Lynch at the time. I just started getting into David Lynch, and I sort of took the opportunity to just make something totally crazy, experimental, and off the wall. And there was honestly nothing like anything else that had been submitted to that festival that was full of a bunch of, more normie film students. And my movie was just this weird experimental shit that honestly nobody liked it. I remember we got this like score back where like the judges, scored the movie. And in all 5 categories that they scored it in, I got a 1 out of 5. They were like, this is trash. But that kind of got me high. I was like, oh, this is not like, again, going back to that kind of provocateur thing, I was like, oh shit. Like I kind of like being the one getting booed. Like I kind of like being the one guy who made a movie that's like so provocative or terrible that, everyone hated it or whatever. So then I was like, then I just kept doing that. I kept making experimental short films every year that I would submit to this film festival, just kind of trying to be the most like edgy or obnoxious, experimental filmmaker. And I just fell in love with it. I just have always enjoyed that. And it's still what I do to this day. I like to make movies with my friends on a very low budget in a very experimental fashion, not really trying to please anybody but myself.
Yeah, dude. Have you ever, there's this podcast called Darren and Josh Make a Movie. And they they both have done very well for themselves. Like they did like some of the Saw movies, and it's like between the two of them, their resume is very, very incredible.
Darren's actually from the same neighborhood as I am, Overland Park, Kansas.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't know much about his origin. I'm friends with Josh, and he's done this podcast, and so I just know Darren a little bit through Josh. But there was like this one episode where they were reading some of like their older, like, or maybe even not even older, but some of their more like indie experimental films that were hated by a bunch of people, and they were like reading like the low reviews and stuff, and it was like a badge of honor where they're just like, yeah, man, people hated this fucking film, but then these random people also fucking loved it, and that's part of the beauty,
Oh, totally, yeah. And I mean, for me, I've always taken in the sense of art, at least, I've always not only taken rejection well, but I actually embrace it. And I think a big part of that reason is like a lot of people then when they want to make movies, they're inspired by more crowd pleasing work, like going back to how I was saying, I originally was into Steven Spielberg and stuff. People are like, they want to do stuff like that. They want to make movies that people universally enjoy. And that's understandable. It's, thank you for making movies that people universally enjoy. But after, my brief obsession with Spielberg and similar filmmakers, I really got hardcore into directors like David Lynch and Gaspar Noé, Lars von Trier, these kind of more extreme filmmakers who often would provoke negative responses when I would love hearing about, movies premiering at the Cannes Film Festival and getting booed and stuff like that,
Yeah.
And so I was kind of primed for that. I was like, the directors I enjoy most, the directors I seek out, Harmony Korine, for example, like they're used to that. Like, one of Harmony Korine's movies, Gummo, which is one of my favorite movies ever, has like a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes, So I was always like, who cares? Like, some of my favorite movies ever have terrible reviews. Like, who gives a shit?
Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, I went through a phase where I was just obsessed with Fight Club. And there's like that legendary story that it was just booed at the Venice Film Festival. I'm not even sure. I think that is like a true story. I don't think that's folklore. Like, I think that actually did happen. But it's like, that's just the legendary, like it was like just booed at Venice. And then it's like, and then that film ended up just being like a cultural icon. Like you had a lot of people. Like my freshman year of college, it was not uncommon for me to just come back from a party or whatever, like hammered and stoned, and just like spin Fight Club until I pass out or something at like 2 a.m. Like that was just something that you did.
That's the most 90s shit ever.
Yeah, totally was, dude. And it wasn't even the 90s, by the way. It was a little after, but yeah, like it was still like just like, yeah, like it was just, I don't know. It was just,
oh yeah, that movie holds up. That's a great one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've only read a couple of his books, and I think it's like the most obvious ones, like Choke, Fight Club, stuff like that. And I thought that Fight Club was the one thing where I thought the movie was as good, if not better, than the book. That's how good it was. Choke, I don't think translated near as well. I thought the Choke film was fine. I didn't dislike it, but it didn't do much for me. But the book, I actually like Choke better than Fight Club as a book.
I'm not even familiar with Choke. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah. If you like Palahniuk, I mean, Choke is one of. I mean, that was probably my favorite novel of his that I've ever read. I haven't read all of them though, but Choke was my favorite. But the Choke movie, it was kind of like more of an indie film that came out like kind of like in that wave where he was really, you know, like firing on all cylinders, like post Fight Club stuff like that. And it was the film was just okay, you know. Like it wasn't bad. It didn't do, and I guess maybe it's like I was so into the book that it's like, you know, sometimes it's hard to meet the expectation. Right. But well, I ask everybody in the kind of lefty YouTube space that does this show the same question. So I'm going to ask you: do you think the space as a whole has been helpful for the cause of progressive change?
Yes, 100%. I think 100% it has. And I can say that personally because it was very instrumental in my own political education. You know, like I said, I definitely knew that like Bernie was the right choice in 2015 or whatever when he popped off. But it was thanks to a lot of the YouTube videos that I watched. They kind of, you know, really elucidated the reasons why. And again, I was still kind of coming of age at that time. I hadn't, you know, read nearly as much. I wasn't nearly as experienced. I was just kind of like, you know, this guy's more lefty than this other candidate, so, you know, he's the one to support. But again, it was YouTube that really educated me, in addition to not just YouTube. I also, like I said, read a bunch, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that YouTube just provides such a easy entry point for specifically young people, but people of all ages who want to engage with politics, but don't necessarily want to like just wake up every morning and like read the New York Times or something. You know, it kind of offers you this ability to engage with it however you like. You know, like our show is a little bit more spicy and fun and dramatic. So I think a lot of people enjoy that vibe. But, you know, there's all sorts of vibes out there. And you can find a political commentator or someone who communicates in a way that resonates with you. And overall, I mean, when I think back on 2016 specifically, yeah, I think that, I mean, I didn't see a lot of channels supporting Hillary Clinton. It seemed like the Bernie movement was alive and well more than anywhere online, but specifically on YouTube. You know, you had this whole ecosystem of content creators that popped up and that were spreading the message and that were, you know, kind of in this like synergistic way, like all participating in this movement. And I thought that was a beautiful thing. And I mean, since then, obviously there's been some setbacks. There's been some people that have gone to the dark side. There's been, you know, this chorus dark money thing, which has emerged. And that's why I have an issue with stuff like that, like the dark money chorus stuff. It's like, I don't want them to come in here and ruin what is a beautiful independent media space. Like, I don't want them to come in here and bring their MSNBC sensibilities and all this dark money and change the DNA of this space, because ultimately, yeah, I do think at its best, it can be extremely helpful.
You know, man, you are the first person that has said yes to that question.
Really?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I mean, everyone, including Billy, including Zach, everyone has either said, some have said straight up no. Some have kind of said a sort of no, sort of yes. Like, which I get. It's a loaded question. There's a lot of different directions to take it. But you are the first straight up yes.
Wow. I guess I'm an optimist, but that's interesting. I'm interested to hear what Zach said and what other people have said to that question, because again, I mean, there's definitely issues with the internet as a whole.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, there's the algorithms and the capitalists and all that. I mean, yeah, there's obviously problems with it, but I'm kind of surprised by that.
No, I think, my answer to that question is overall no, but it doesn't have to stay that way. And I think I'm coming from the space of, I've seen it go from this sort of obscure thing to kind of a juggernaut in the media landscape. And to see what qualifies for thought leadership now is, disturbing to me on multiple levels. And we're a country that has no kind of political education background, so people will just sort of make shit up. And what I find refreshing in everything I just said is that there are plenty of diamonds in the rough, and there's plenty of people calling that out, and that's where I kind of find my hope. So it's short answer, no, but there's been some wins, and it could eventually reach, I think, a better plane.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think you're right, obviously, about the quality of thought leaders and how a lot of it is just garbage. But I mean, I guess I would counter by saying, hasn't it been that way before? I mean, back in the Bush era, before the internet, and there were just a bunch of gatekeepers that prevented people like you and I from even having a voice. And then it was Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow, and I mean, it's not like I have a ton of respect for whoever the prominent thought leaders in the media at that time were either, before the internet. So, I mean, now, and admittedly, I'm probably in a little bit of a bubble or an echo chamber where it's I know which channels I trust, I know which creators I trust, so I kind of have curated my feed to give me what I like. So, I mean, to be fair, that is my perspective. But I feel as someone who is media literate, who knows how to navigate this stuff, it's not that hard to curate yourself a pretty good, sort of ecosystem of information.
No, that's an excellent point. I mean, and yeah, I totally take your point. I just would like to, when you have this kind of cultural shift, and when you have an equalizer to some extent, which is what the indie media landscape over the past 20 years has kind of become, I would like to think that it would move forward a little bit instead of kind of staying in neutral. And so I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. And again, it doesn't need to stay that way. I mean, it's not a static thing, like what I just said might not be as relevant a year from now. And I hope it's not. I don't want it to be, What I find so refreshing about you guys, and then, I said this to Zach, so I'll say it to you too. I love the fact, there's sort of, and I'm sure you've encountered this too, and I'm curious your take on it, but there's sort of this stigma on the left a little bit, especially in the online left, that, culture doesn't really have its place, and, we should basically just be miserable all the time because we live in this post-capitalist or capitalist hellscape. And what are you doing making a film or telling jokes on stage when we're around all this misery? We have to, it's well, culture helps tell this story. And so what I find so refreshing about you guys is that, you're two guys in Kansas City who are going to also talk about film and talk about sports and whatever else. And I just kind of find that refreshing and approachable, as opposed to always looking for traitors, so to speak. So, and again, I'm generalized. I'm not saying that's everyone. Of course it's not. But I'm saying there's a little bit of that vibe that I think is kind of counterproductive. And you guys are sort of like the anecdote to that,
Well, I really appreciate that you enjoy that aspect of our show. It's definitely something that we not only do because we want to set that example and remind people to touch grass and go engage with their friends and community and make art and, what did I say earlier? Go smoke pot and make love in the field or whatever. But, also just because that is something that Zach and I want to do. We are people we're into politics, but we're also into a lot of other things, we don't want to just be monotone and talk about the same thing every day. We have other interests. We want to explore them. And I do think that's a unique thing about YouTube as well, or independent media, where you're not so kind of locked into one specific lane. If you're on CNN or something, no one really wants to hear you go off on a 30-minute long side tangent about some movie that you saw last weekend. Like, it's not going to work. But again, I think, it kind of gives people this vibe. They're hanging out. I mean, that's why people form these like parasocial relationships, because they really do feel like they're hanging out with the content creators that they spend time with and that they listen to. And I do think it kind of creates a sense of community, right? In a way that other more traditional forms of media prevented. Like, I really do feel like the Vanguard community is a community. Like, Zach and I know the names of the people in our chat. We have a rapport with many of them that at this point has gone on for years. Like, sometimes we'll see people in our chat. It says like they've been a YouTube member for like 38 months or 48 months or something. It's like, damn, this guy has literally been around. He's been in our chat. We know him. We have a rapport with him. It feels like a community. There are people that you're excited to see when you go live, excited to hear them, respond to whatever you're saying. And I like that about it. So I think it's a serious force for good. And more than anything, I think that the issues with it that you've talked about, it's more a reflection of the world around us than the space itself. Like I think that, as I mentioned, that trauma from seeing Bernie lose, imagine if he hadn't lost. Like, imagine if that hadn't have happened. I don't think that we would have experienced nearly that amount of sort of like splintering and infighting and drama and toxicity that you reference. Like, I think that all was more a result of what was happening. It's not like everyone just decided to do that. It was like a genuine response in a sense.
That's a good point. No, I take your point. That's also like a very good point. And yeah, I actually regularly think about what the world would be like had Bernie won. Like had we been coming off of like 8 years of a Bernie Sanders administration, had Bernie. I honestly think, and look, the truth of the matter too, if we're being honest, Bernie would have been up against a Congress. He would have been up against a Senate. He would have been up against a media. He would have been up against, I mean, like they really would have tethered the position of president down to, just being able to move his index finger a little bit, like that's it.
Oh, you're right. You're not wrong.
Of course that would have happened. And Bernie, sometimes Bernie doesn't really go to the mat as much as we would like him to. I think that's a fair critique. So there would have been times where we all would have been frustrated. Totally. But there's these little things called executive orders. And so it's like Bernie definitely would have done a lot of things that would have been, I think, completely status quo shifting that we would have gotten. Would we have gotten every win we were hoping for? Of course not. Of course not. But we would have gotten some big freaking wins that would have, I think, changed the lives of regular Americans for damn sure. For the
100%.
better.
Yeah, 100%. Plus, I also just think that allowing Trump, not to sound like a total liberal, but like just even allowing Trump to become president, I think it just it did so much damage to our society, to our culture, to the way people communicate, to the standards of what people think is acceptable as far as how you behave. Like, I genuinely think that Trump's attitude, his behavior, like, I do think it set a terrible example for a lot of people that people followed because he was successful in doing that. He literally became president doing it. And that, again, it rubbed off on people, even in subconscious ways, I think. So even regardless of what Bernie would have done himself, even if he had just prevented Trump from becoming our president and leading us down this dark path, I mean, I think that would have changed everything, and it would have resulted in way less nihilism, so much less anger and frustration and people just feeling desperate and, leading us to where we are now. But, I think you're right about that too. I think it just would have, and also just think about all the people it would have inspired to run at local level. It would have been huge.
Man. Yeah. It's, it's depressing to think about. Well, let me ask you this as we're starting to wrap up here. What were some kind of defining moments? I mean, as the Vanguard has, grown and you guys have been growing pretty significantly the past few years, like what have been some sort of defining moments where you and Zach were kind of like, oh shit, we're onto something?
I mean, going back to what I mentioned, Thomas Frank was a big one. That was huge when we got him on the show. I remember it was like him and I think Marianne Williamson. We had like within a week or two of each other. And at that point we were like, oh shit, like this is some serious shit. Like if we can get guests like this, then there might actually be a serious path here. So that was pretty big. And then also we like I said, we launched our channel at just the messiest possible time, where the most infighting was happening. And that is sort of why we, did lean into the whole, left on left violence. Like, let's talk about these beefs. Let's dissect these dramas. And, some people like that vibe more than others, obviously, but I've always appreciated it as a way to really dig into the substantive issues. Like, I think that even though it was toxic and even though people look back and cringe sometimes, I think launching our channel right during the thick of the Force the Vote movement it did set the tone for a lot of the discussions we have. Because again, regardless of whatever people think of that in retrospect, at the time, it was a genuinely fascinating conversation and a really substantive debate over how elected officials should act, how the squad members and progressives, how they should, treat leadership of the Democratic Party, stuff like that. And, when Zach and I started getting traction covering that, it genuinely did kind of feel like, oh, we have a purpose now. Like, we're not the people that are necessarily actually part of this debate ourselves, but people do like watching us break it down and dissect it and give our side of the analysis, So that was huge too, right? When that was all popping off and people actually started to pay attention to our coverage of it, that's kind of when we realized that was our lane. So I'd say that was a big one for sure. And then I think the biggest moment where it really felt solidified for Zach and I, well, there were two of them. One was when we were able to go interview Jesse Ventura in person in Minneapolis for a little documentary we made. That felt huge. And then also one of the craziest things that's ever happened to either Zach or I, he might have mentioned this too, but we just woke up one day and Susan Sarandon had tweeted out our podcast and said, hey, do you guys have a Patreon that I can support? And that's when we created our Patreon so that Susan Sarandon could support us.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't realize that was the way it happened for y'all. I mean, I knew Susan Sarandon was a supporter, but I didn't know it was like she existed pre-Patreon for you.
Yeah, 100%. And it was thanks to our Force the Vote coverage that she found our podcast, because I think we had just done this debate. We had hosted a debate about Force the Vote between Ryan Grimm and Ryan Knight. I don't know if you remember Ryan Knight. He was on Twitter at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's still doing his thing, but at the time he was a big Twitter poster, and we set up a debate, which again was another huge first big deal for us because it got a lot of attention. And right after that, Susan Sarandon tweeted about us.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's really, Force the Vote was really, really interesting. And one of the issues I supported this strategy. And what was frustrating was how much it became about personalities instead of the strategy itself. So yeah, it was cool to see that, dissected, on the outside by people, because, it was frustrating to see. It was frustrating to see it, just become about all this surface level stuff instead of about the issue itself, the strategy itself. Okay, let's think a couple rows ahead. And I think that, you gotta kind of give a kick to the teeth politically, a kick to the teeth at times. Like, you just gotta do it, and you gotta make people show their hands. And I think the best argument for that strategy is, I live in California. I live in I live in what we're told is one of the more progressive states out there. I live in a state where there is overwhelmingly support for universal health care, overwhelmingly in the state of California. Yet we can't even get our state bill up to a vote because they won't, like they just take turns being the villain. They pull the bill, and it's like, you have to make these people being elected officials, you have to make them show their hands. And to make them show their hands, you might have to, kind of play hardball a little bit. It's what you have to do. And these people that pull it, one of them has to lose their job for doing that. It just has to happen. And people don't want to hear that. And I'm like, look, it's just, you have to. If they know that that's a kiss of death, if you're an elected official and if I pull this bill, goodbye to my job, they're not going to frickin' do it. They're not going to put their colleagues above their constituents because they know it's a kiss of death for them. And that's just what you got to do. You got to play hardball sometimes. There's a time to not play hardball, sure. There's a time for everything, but there's a time where it's like, you really got to just go for the jugular unless you want nothing to ever change.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I'm a huge advocate of like a more left-wing aggressive Tea Party strategy. I really do want to see the progressives like separate themselves from the establishment Democrats and declare war on that faction of the party. But that's what made it such a fascinating debate. And it definitely kind of got a little bit crazy at times. But again, I was even in retrospect, it's like that was a substantive conversation. And I don't think we should shy away from that. I think specifically on YouTube, people, one thing that we have to understand and come to terms with is that people do like drama. They like debate. Why do you think debates are so popular as far as a way to engage with more intellectual ideas? It's because people need a little bit of friction to get them interested in this stuff. And again, going back to YouTube itself, I think that's a big a big way that people can sort of get interested in politics, right? Like it makes it more entertaining to watch. It makes it more fun to watch. And specifically, if at the heart of it, there is something substantive, I think that's totally fine. If you're just fighting over like, did you hear that AOC is cheating on her husband? Like that's, not that.
Is that a thing that's out there?
No. I'm just making up some bullshit.
I didn't even know. Are they even married? This is how rumors get started. I don't even think they're married.
No, they are. My point is
they are? All right.
I think so. But if it's just some personal petty bullshit, obviously that is just real drama. But if it's actually based around some substantive issue, then I think that's way more than drama. And I think it's actually a very, it's a great entry point, again, for people to actually get involved in politics. Because, imagine just going up to some normie and being like, are you invested in like who the next Democratic Speaker of the House is? Like they're gonna fucking fall asleep. No one gives a shit. Like you have to be such a fucking nerd to care about 99% of this stuff. Most people only pay attention to politics during the presidential election. Why? Because it's a fucking massive reality TV spectacle. It's a huge drama. There's debates. There's crazy catty petty infighting going on. Like that's what people actually like. And then if you can kind of treat all politics like that, it gets people interested.
I like that. You have definitely swayed me in a more hopeful direction than I just was about an hour ago. Well, in closing, tell everybody where they can go to learn more about you. Mention the Vanguard. Mention your film stuff too. Let's get the full Gavin anatomy here.
Yeah, the Vanguard is the name of the channel. If you just type that into YouTube, it should pop up. And yeah, I also am a filmmaker, as we talked a little bit about. I co-directed a film called No Clip, which premiered a couple years ago, and I'm currently in post-production on No Clip 3. So rounding out the trilogy, hoping to premiere that later this summer in Chattanooga. But yeah, that's what you can find if you just look up No Clip. If you want to watch it, it's available on a couple different streaming services. So if you want to check that out, feel free to. But yeah, I had a really good time chatting, Ron. I can't believe it's already been an hour. That flew by, and I really appreciated hearing your thoughts on everything.
Always great chatting with you, Gavin. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. We got to get you back on the Vanguard soon.
That was Gavin Charles. Check out No Clip, check out the Vanguard, and a couple episodes that we referenced here. Obviously, last week's episode 129, Zac Polston, episode 112, Hank Thompson, and episode 61, Thomas Frank. So check those out. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Intersectional. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Please do make sure you're subscribed, leave a review, give us a 5-star. That helps get the word out about this. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, patreon.com/Ron Placone. For Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool content, full stand-up clips not available anywhere else, upcoming insider information on events and upcoming films and projects, and we do a Zoom hangout once a month, and you get the 1000 episodes before they're dropped to the public. All right, 130, crossing another decade. Daylight savings happened this week, and we're crossing into another decade. We're almost going to be at the 150 mark, almost midway through another century, which is wild. All right, catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.